There are many options for the Senate at this point, and I will move for one of the options. I move that the speech of Senator Gordon and the interpellation of Senator Cayetano be referred to the Committee on Rules, and we will study further how to address these points that they raised. We will take special note of the manifestations, Mr. President. So move.
Any objection?
Mr. President.
Aye. Senator
Mr.
Cayetano.
President, may I just add to that referral a point of order that can also be referred to the Committee on Rules? That the proper procedure was to give it back to the Committee on Justice. Now that it has been clarified that the substance and the topic is the same investigation that was with the Justice Committee. Again, I'm not making a decision now, but throwing it to the Committee on Rules. And thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, there's
Gordon?
a statement. I would just like to thank the Majority Floor Leader. Far be it from my mind to say that it should be referred to any committee. Like I said, I just want to unburden myself here. I want to be able to come here and be able to look everybody in the eye and say, you're my friend, and I trust you. And that you are for my country and you are for our country.
Yes, I agree, but Mr. President, the points that were raised are very valid. And I think the Committee on Rules should look into these matters.
I bow to the wisdom of the Majority Floor Leader, Mr. President.
Senator Trillanes,
Thank you,
it's
Mr.
a pleasure, Senator Trillanes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Is it connected to the motion?
I just need to state for the record regarding the statement of Senator Cayetano that there was no agreement that the subject matter of this privilege speech I made last Monday was the same and covered by the subject matter that was heard by the Committee on Justice. I maintain that those are two separate subjects and that justifies the referral to the Committee on Public Order.
Mr. President, may I call for the previous question?
The motion has been made by the Majority Leader to refer the privileged speech of Senator Gordon and the interpellation thereon of Senator Cayetano to the Committee on Rules. Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President,
Senator Cayetano.
I apologize to Senator Trillanes if I made it appear that there's a consensus. What I meant is that it seems obvious to me, and I thought it was obvious to everyone, that it's the same. But we have to defer to each other and decide collectively. So precisely, let's give it to the Committee on Rules to decide. And then lastly, Mr. Chair, yung sinabi ko naman sampal po kay Senator Dick, I was talking about sampal sa ating committee system and not to one senator. So I hope that we can seriously consider the implications if we're going to take another route. Thank you, Mr. President.
It's a pleasure, Senator Poe.
Mr. President, thank you. I would like to thank Senator Gordon for his manifestation. Yes, Senator Gordon usually delivers a speech, talagang malaman, madamdamin. I would like to address the following points, though, that I've realized during his speech. Number one, I think he mentioned that we shouldn't allow this person to come over here and lie again to us because we should not give this person the benefit of doing so. I would just like to give out my own opinion about this. Making him come here to speak is not for the benefit of this person. I believe that making him come here to speak is also for the benefit of those of us who would like to know what made him change his mind and why is he doing so. Mr. President, I think that if we were to judge based on the statements of the other resource persons that came here, and we would reject them for having lied in the past, I think that we will hardly have any resource persons left to come here. There are certain self-preservations that obviously these individuals might have had when they first came over here to speak. On the other hand, I would like to thank Senator Gordon for being upfront about it. Senator Ping and I were discussing, at least he was truthful in saying that he was not going to hear it, that he thought it was a waste of time, because what he could do as chairman of the committee is just to say, yes, it can be referred to my committee, but I will sit on it and I will do nothing. But then he said, if it's referred to my committee, I think it's a waste of time and I will not hear it. So thank you for clarifying that. On the other hand also, Mr. President, Senator Ping, I'm sorry to my seatmate, but I think that this is a very laudable reason also for him. He's uncomfortable in breaking the collegiality between us by accepting the referral to his committee, although I think that he's a capable chairman of public order and he could hear this fairly. I can understand his predicament. So, Mr. President, most of you are lawyers here, but we have Section 14, Rule 10 of the Senate Rules, which reads, whenever necessary, special committees shall be organized, the membership and jurisdiction of which can be determined or shall be determined by the Senate President. Proceeding from this, and considering that the Justice Committee Chair has expressed his objection to reopen the hearing on the EJK, and if in the case the Public Order Committee is not likewise inclined to do so, may I then manifest that there may be a necessity that a special committee be organized for this purpose, given the following. Number one, the allegations of Mr. Lascañas are serious and appears to corroborate the testimonies of Mr. Matobato. The Senate should be given an opportunity to test his credibility. It doesn't mean he's telling the truth already by him coming out in the open right now, or the truthfulness of his allegations in the interest of the public. Number two, Mr. Lascañas may have perjured himself by making allegations that are diametrically opposed to what he had previously given under oath before the Justice Committee. This opportunity that we will give ourselves to hear and scrutinize his allegations before a special committee that may be organized would definitely not absolve Mr. Lascañas for any criminal act that he may have already committed. Mr. President, you were with me in 2004 when no one would hear us about all of the fraud allegations of that time during the elections. You were also with us during the hearings against the fertilizer fund scam, when the Blue Ribbon Committee refused to hear it, and it was the Committee on Agriculture that had to assume that responsibility. I feel that even if we have other venues like the Ombudsman and the courts, it's always the Senate that is the last bastion for the public to be able to hear all of the testimonies without limit. And so I appeal to my colleagues. We may have our inclinations and political affiliations, but this is not for anyone. This is really to preserve also what the Senate has done in the past, and that is a forum for the public to hear the issues that are going on. Now, with regards to Mama Sapano, it was mentioned that we didn't even have a committee report. But it has not been approved. We have a committee report. It's not been voted on. But Mr. President, what we have suggested are recommendations on the charges to be filed against those individuals were carried on by the Ombudsman. Usurpation of power, etc. And so with that, Mr. President, I thank you for this opportunity.
I'm not giving up my seat.
Senator Gordon.
I thank the manifestation of the gentle lady, but let me just be clear again. Maybe I must have been misunderstood. The point here is not just is lying. The point here is the dignity of the Senate, the respect that the Senate must be given, because, as she said, reiterating what I previously said, this is the bastion on which the people can go to. No one should be allowed to trifle with the Senate insofar as the truth is concerned. No one must take an oath here and then say later on, I want to do it again. He missed his boat. He lied to the Senate. The only reason why I give them that option about being able to go to the ombudsman or to anyone, because those are indeed options. And again, if we don't do anything about it, I fear that all the others who are conducting investigations may not have that kind of suasion upon witnesses that they can easily be trifled with. You've seen me, Mr. President. When you have witnesses who are former police officers who try to trifle with the committee, I put them in their place. At least I thought I did, Mr. President. When lawyers come in and lie to their teeth, see if they lie, we're able to interpolate them. Just to give you an example, those two lawyers from a Catholic school that I respect comes down here, appointed to one of the highest positions, if not a very respectable position. And they come here and make us believe, under oath, oh, we were just going to go there and preserve the evidence and to try and entrap somebody who was in another place. They were there for 8 to 9 hours. Nobody believed them. And we wrecked their testimony. See, that's what the Senate affords all of us. We can tear down the testimony. That is the opportunity for us. That's why everybody should attend the hearings. Because, like that guy, he says, oh, I got the bag. I did not touch it. But he made his brother touch it. Nakikita na sa video, nagsisinungaling pa. That is what we have gone down to, Mr. President. Or that other gentleman, I still consider him a gentleman because he has not been judged yet. An officer, former officer, a general officer at that. He comes in and says, got 18 million, I did not count it, I just brought it home. My gosh, Mr. President, that is where we try to destroy the testimony and prove that there was lying. I thought that we had built the case for the ombudsman already on those cases, Mr. President. But in this particular case, we were not even given a chance. We did not bring this witness in. Again, I reiterate, he came in on his own volition, on the invitation of the senator from Bicol. And he lied to her. He lied to all of us. And to come down now and say, please, second chance. No. You've already stained the dignity of the Senate, and we don't want that dignity, that respect that must be accorded this body to all 24 constituting the Senate of the Republic of the Philippines. It must be. We're talking about a forum here, Mr. President. Indeed, this is a forum. But not a forum upon which people can perorate and create publicity at the expense of others after they have lied. They will come here and get the forum. He can get the forum. He got the forum the other day. I was surprised that we let him use that. That's reserved for senators. Maybe it was under the control of one senator. That's fine. But, Mr. President, if we say that this is the forum on which people complain that they have been killed, and we act. Their relatives come to us. It's a forum upon which people complain that they're being given the runaround by this particular. That's why we create a Blue Ribbon Committee. That's why we act fast, Mr. President. And that's why, the question that I really dread all the time from the media is how many more hearings are you going to have? When is the last hearing? It's so hard to answer that. Mr. President, kung pag-uusapan lang ang publicity rito, ako matako lamang sa publicity, i-hear natin ulit. Pakinggan natin ulit at sigurado lahat ng TV na andyan. Ano nakita natin? Take it to its logical extreme, di ganun rin. Hindi rin paniniwalaan yan, tatarang yung risa, ano ba, totoo ano ba sinasabi mo? I-impeach ba natin? O ano gagawin natin? He can do that in another. He's got adequate lawyers, Mr. President. They claim they're very good lawyers, and I know they are. I know them. But this is not the forum for that. This is not a forum for grandstanding and trying to get things done. This is a place where we get things done. So, with all due respect to my colleague, whom I stood up with during the campaign, and she knows that. Never abandoned her. And I was honest to the President of the Philippines. I voted for her. Hindi ako lumilipat. And I told her I belong to Bagong Bayan. I'm not going to join your party. And I can see her nodding. I'm always upfront, Mr. President. I can handle it. But I have to stand up. This is not the proper forum for this man who has lied, who has killed, who murdered his own brothers, Cain the second and Cain the third. Pinatay niya kapatid niya. Bibigyan niya ng forum yan? Excuse me. Pardon me. I know I always give people second chances, Mr. President. But, hey, this is stretching it, Mr. President. Thank you.
Was Senator Pacquiao raising his hand earlier? Pacquiao?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm about to say something, Mr. President, that the dignity of the Senate is very important, Mr. President. Kasi kung pagbibigyan natin yan, Mr. President, it's gonna be the basis, no, the basis na magiging argument dito sa Senado sa mga darating pang mga investigation, that a witness can lie and change his testimony. And we don't want that, Mr. President. Hindi natin papayagan yan dahil magiging basis yan. And we know, and I know that the lawyers are here. There's so many lawyers here, and our colleagues. They know that it's gonna be the basis in the further discussion or cases in the situation like that, Mr. President, na bibigyan natin ng ganyang pagkakataon. Hindi na hanggang to the next generation, Mr. President, ganyan na maging basis. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Lacson, is recognized.
First, I'd like to thank the distinguished lady from Pangasinan and Iloilo for her manifestation. But however, lest it be misunderstood that I'm shirking from the responsibility of hearing the privileged speech or this issue, that is far from the truth, Mr. President. It is a mandate, having been referred to the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, which I chair. It's not I'm willing, but it is a mandate, and it's my obligation to hear it. But I will yield to the wisdom of the body, and I do not object to the manifestation of Senator Poe if a special committee will be created for the purpose. I would just like to clarify that, and I would just like to preserve the sensibility of the issue, and I'm sensitive to, of course, I want to be courteous and respectful to Senator Gordon, being the chairman of the Justice Committee, which originally heard this issue. And I agree with Senator Cayetano that this is the same issue, DDS. But since it was referred to the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, I feel that it is my obligation, having been given the mandate, to act on referrals to that particular committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just wanted to manifest that in the face of lying by witnesses, the Senate is not powerless. In fact, we have exercised our powers as a Senate to punish in the past witnesses who have lied, who have shown contemptible behavior. When I was chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee in 2012, Mr. President, a witness refused to answer the simple question on the issue of rice smuggling, who his financier was. And because he refused to answer the basic question of who his financier was, we held him in contempt, Mr. President, and he was here. He was detained here for almost 2 months. So we are not powerless, Mr. President. In the case of Mr. Lascañas, if it is the pleasure of the body that he is punished, then we can do so to send a strong signal.
that the Senate will not allow itself to be lied to. For the record, Mr. President.
What's the pleasure of Senator Pacquiao?
Mr. President, for the record, Mr. President, for this manifestation, yes, we have the power to contempt any witnesses, Mr. President, if telling the lie. But, Mr. President, we are talking about the dignity of the Senate. The dignity of the Senate, Mr. President, because that's the most important thing. Ang problema kasi dito, Mr. President, na magiging basis na yan na ang witness, kung ako witness, pwede na ako magsinungaling dahil pwede naman palang magbago ng statement kailangan ipakita natin yung na tayo dito sa Senado, wag nating paglaruan yung posisyon natin as a senator. Ipakita natin yung tinatawag natin dignity ng Senado, especially yung mga task na yung mga designated committees ng bawat isa. Dapat ipakita natin at respetuhin din natin yung committee report ng chairman ng committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay. Senator Gordon.
Again, it's as if the issue is punishment or sanctions. Senator Pacquiao is correct. We cannot allow our Senate to be the cockpit of lies, the cockpit of bare-faced disrespect. I have also arrested people who lied in the committee, Mr. President. I already arrested people who refused to be subpoenaed, and we picked them up. So it's not just a question of just telling them that, hey, you'll be punished. We really have to make sure that the message is clear. You do not lie anywhere. Thou shalt not lie anywhere, especially in the Senate of the Republic of the Philippines. Give it the respect that it is due.
Mr. President, I agree.
Senator Pangilinan?
I agree, Mr. President, that we should not lie, and that's precisely why we want to know the truth. Mr. President, if we stop at condemning because the person lied, I think we should not stop at condemning this individual because he lied. I think we should proceed and find out the truth. And that is precisely the role of the Senate as a check and balance for other branches of this government. We're interested in the truth, Mr. President, for the record.
Thank you. Majority Leader?
I was asking Senator Gordon, ano legislation? Thou shalt not lie? I'm kidding, Mr. President.
There's already a perjury, Your Honor. We can amend that and even make it even stronger.
I was joking, Mr. President.
I know. I
was
always take
even
you seriously,
tempted.
even if you're joking.
I'm even tempted to give a name to the committee that Senator Po is hindi maganda pakinggan yung Committee on Lies. Committee on Fabulists.
But
Mr. President,
before we leave the subject matter, Majority Leader, given the manifestation of Senator Lacson, the Chair believes that there is no necessity to invoke Section 14. Hence, I will not be forming any special committee.
thank you, Mr. President. We would just like to thank the Senator Potet for giving a preview of what the Rules Committee will be taking up. Thank you. Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Secretary, let's...
Bills on first reading. 1339, an act right-sizing the national government to improve public service delivery. Senator Honasan II.
Referred to the Committees on Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation and Finance.
1340, an act prohibiting the imposition of expiry dates on gift checks by issuers and for other purposes. Senator Sabiri.
The Committee on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship.
1341, an act creating the Cooperative Development Commission, repealing for the purpose Republic Act Number 6939, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Cooperative, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation, Ways and Means and Finance.
1342, an act amending Republic Act Number 7743, otherwise known as an act providing for the establishment of congressional, city, and municipal libraries and barangay reading center throughout the Philippines and for other purposes, Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Local Government and Finance.
1343, an act creating an advanced studies development program for exceptional employees from the government and the private sector and for other purposes, Senator Sani Angara.
The Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation and Finance.
1344, an act promoting the scientific propagation, processing, utilization, and development of Philippine native animals, hereby creating the Philippine Native Animal Development Center, Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance.
1345, an act redefining the mandate of the Public Attorney's Office, amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 9046 and pertinent provisions of Executive Order Number 292, otherwise known as the Administrative Code of 1987 as amended, and for other purposes, Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation.
1346, an act to protect the independence of our judicial system, Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights, Ways and Means and Finance.
1347, an act granting hazard pay to justice sector officials and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights, Ways and Means and Finance.
1348, an act to promote positive, nonviolent discipline of children, prohibiting all forms of corporal punishment, humiliating and degrading treatment, providing penalty therefore, and appropriating funds and for other purposes, Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations and Gender Equality, Youth and Finance.
Resolutions number 297, a resolution directing the Senate Committee on Education, Arts, and Culture to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the safety guidelines and policies on educational tours and field trips of colleges and higher education institutions, Senator Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture.
298, resolution directing the appropriate Senate Committee to inquire and review in aid of legislation the 4-piece cash for rice subsidy program of the SWD, Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committee on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development.
299, resolution directing the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development to inquire and review in aid of legislation the implementation of the scholarship programs in agriculture of the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development and Education, Arts and Culture.
300, resolution directing the appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent killings of lawyers with the end in view of enacting measures to secure the safety and welfare of the members of the Philippine Bar, Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Justice and Human Rights.
Communications, a letter from Secretary Salvador Mijaldea, dated 22 December 2016, transmitting to Congress through the Senate Republic Act Number 10924 or the Fiscal Year 2017 General Appropriations Act and the President's Budget Action Message.
To the Archives.
Letter from the Office of the President of the Philippines, transmitting to the Senate the revised Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Program, first quarter report, and the approved first and second lists of project for Phase 1 of the RAFP-MP pursuant to Section 3 of Republic Act Number 7898 as amended by Republic Act 10349.
to the Committee on National Defense and Security.
Letter from the Public-Private Partnership Centers submitting to the Senate a copy of the signed concession agreement for the ISLEX Connector Road project, including all its annexes, executed by the Department of Public Works and Highways as the grantor, and the Manila North Tollways Corporation as the concessionaire, on November 23, 2016, in compliance with the revised implementing rules and regulations of Republic Act number 6957, as amended by Republic Act number 7718, otherwise known as the amended Build, Operate, and Transfer Law.
To the Committee on Public Works. Majority Leader.
Thank you. Mr. President, earlier the Senate Bill 1336 was referred to the Committee on Public Services. This is a bill introduced by Senator Zubiri. And with the agreement that Senator Poe was informed and agreed, Senator Zubiri wishes that this Senate bill be referred to the Committee on Trade, likewise, as primary committee. So I move to change referral from the Committee on Public Services to the Committee on Trade, primarily, and secondarily to the Committee on Public Services.
What is the Senate bill involved?
1336, Mr. President.
So the motion...
The act to take... Airline passenger rights.
Okay, the motion is for the, Senate Bill number 1336 about the airline passenger rights to be primarily referred to the Committee on Trade and secondarily to the Committee on Public Services. Any objection? There being no, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The two more. Upon the request of Senator Poe and with the consent of the Chamber, after getting the approval of the concerned committee chairs, we move that the referral of Senate Bill 1123 or the PNP Educational Bill be transferred to the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs from the Committee on Public Order to the Committee on Civil Service and Professional Regulations, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, the referral of Senate Bill number 1123 is transferred to the Committee on Civil Service.
Mr. President, the journal for yesterday, number 65, is now ready. So I move that we defer with the reading, dispense with the reading and approve journal of number 65 of yesterday, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 65th session of February 21, 2017 and consider the same as approved.
With the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1280 under Committee Report number 22.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure amending the Corporation Code of the Philippines. Parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpellation. So I move to recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Vision of Codes and Laws, Senator Frank Rilon, and to interpellate the Minority Leader, Senator Ralph Recto.
Can we
ask for a 1 minute suspension to allow Senator Recto to come to the hall?
Yes, a minute suspension.
Senator Recto is here, Mr. President.
Okay, so Senator Drilon, as the sponsor is recognized, and the Minority Leader, Senator Recto, is recognized to interpellate.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. With my former Senate President, yield to a few questions from his deputy.
It will be my honor to respond to the questions of our learned Minority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. Sponsor, first of all, let me commend the sponsor of this measure. It is a very important piece of legislation, and I support many of the provisions, especially the creation of one-person corporations, among others, Mr. President. Having said that, Mr. President, and to the distinguished sponsor, the main purpose of my interpellation is to ensure that the constitutional provision on Filipino equity, participation in corporations is faithfully implemented through this proposed measure, and Congress is now presented with the opportunity to define once and for all the term capital, as referred to but still undefined in our Constitution and statutes when used in determining the ownership of a corporation. Also, we are cognizant of the constitutional recognition on the role of the private sector. And for this purpose, we must encourage, through this bill, private sector participation in the development of the national economy by enhancing the ease of doing business and minimizing government intervention, SEC discretion, and regulation in business affairs. Mr. President, it is the policy of the state, as enshrined in the 1987 Constitution, to develop a self-reliant and independent national economy, effectively controlled by Filipinos. But the state recognizes also the important role of the private sector in the development of the nation's economy. Section 19 and 20, Article 2, Declaration of Principles and State Policies of the Constitution. Section 19, the state shall develop a self-reliant and independent national economy effectively controlled by Filipinos. Section 20, the state recognizes the indispensable role of the private sector, encourages private enterprise, and provides incentives to needed investments. With this in mind, Mr. President, allow me to proceed with my question to the distinguished sponsor. Mr. President, for the purpose of determining the controlling interest in a corporation, what is the definition of the term capital?
The Supreme Court has decided in two cases on, in effect, the definition of capital. Insofar as the nationality requirement in corporations engaged in public service. These are the cases of Gamboa and the case of Roy versus Herbosa. In these two cases, in the first case, the Supreme Court ruled that in the Gamboa decision, the court opined that the full beneficial ownership of 60% of the outstanding capital stock and 60% of the voting rights is required for purposes of complying with the constitutional mandate that the corporation should have at least 60% equity held by Filipinos. This was a very difficult decision. I mean, this was a precedent-setting decision, and it caused a lot of debates. Subsequently, there was another decision in the case of Roy versus Herbosa, the respondent being the present commissioner, chairman, and the Roy versus Mendoza doctrine provided that, again reiterated the rule that for purposes of control, the whole, the total number of outstanding shares of stock entitled to vote in the election of directors and the total number of outstanding shares of stock, whether or not entitled to vote in the election, must be taken into account in determining capital. Now, Mr. President, these are interpretations of the Supreme Court on the issue of control and capital.
Correct.
The present draft committee report that we have submitted to the chamber provides under Section 65 amending Section 140 of the Corporation Code by saying that the Commission shall determine the nationality of a corporation based on the outstanding capital stock entitled to vote in accordance with the Constitution, jurisprudence, and applicable law. The present text, Mr. President, of our committee report, the present text of Senate Bill number 1280 is to codify the majority decision in Roy versus Herbosa. At the appropriate time, we will amend this section 140 so that we will not codify anything. We will leave the matter of the interpretation of what is capital as found in the Constitution to the Supreme Court, because admittedly this present wording that you are submitting codifies the ruling of the Supreme Court in both the Gamboa and Roy decisions. I think the better tack to follow is that we just delete any reference to the decisions and just leave the matter to jurisprudence, because the interpretation of the Supreme Court can change. We repeat, the Supreme Court interpreted the constitutional provision, the nationality requirement under the Constitution, which requires under Article 12, Section 11, that public utility companies should be owned by at least 60% of Filipino citizens. We do not want to codify that, because this is an interpretation of the Supreme Court on the Constitution. This is not a policy issue. So therefore, we leave it to jurisprudence and the Supreme Court to continuously to interpret this provision and not codify it in our measure. Because otherwise, if the Supreme Court changes its mind and we have codified the decision in the present law, we will have problems later on.
Yes. Thank you for that response, Mr. President. And that's precisely the point that I'm trying to drive at here, Mr. President. And that's why my first question, yes, I am familiar with all the Supreme Court rulings, and I've read them. And they have changed over time,
yes,
as far as the singular case is concerned. And I've read also the dissenting opinions. And I saw it in this corporation code. And precisely why my first question is, or was earlier, did we define capital in this amendment to the corporation code? In fact, we have not, but the gentleman is correct. By way of the wording, it in effect institutionalizes the majority decision of the Supreme Court. My personal opinion is that we should define it in this law and not even amend it to allow the future Supreme Court to keep on changing its definition on capital. That is a personal opinion I have, Mr. President. Now, let me explain why. There are many issues at hand here, Mr. President.
Just if you will allow me, Mr. President, just to respond to that.
Yes.
If we codify, we are codifying an interpretation of the Supreme Court on the meaning of 60% control in terms of the capital. This is not, I would repeat, a policy pronouncement of the Supreme Court. This is an interpretation of the Constitution. As you and I know, Mr. President, the Supreme Court changes its interpretation.
Correct.
If we codify, in effect, the majority decision in Roy versus Herbosa, and the Supreme Court changes its mind on how they interpret the Constitution, then we'll have problems with the codified...
Precisely my point, Mr. President. What I'm saying here is that why not define capital in the corporation code so that it will be easier for us to determine sino ba talaga ang may-ari ng mga corporations, halimbawa, in keeping with the mandate of the constitutional restrictions. Okay? Now, having said that,
Mr. President.
and precisely why I are we defining capital here? And apparently, the gentleman is saying, let's not define it.
Let the Supreme Court define it because this is an interpretation of the Constitution.
Now,
That is why...
my second question, Mr. President, is that, is there any law in our statute books that define capital?
I am not aware of any, and the definition that the decision of the Supreme Court, I would repeat, is on their interpretation of how the 60%
Correct.
capital of equity should be determined.
Precisely. And that is my point, Mr. President. Because Congress has failed to define capital, the Supreme Court defined capital as word in the Constitution by themselves. Now, because of that decision, that is jurisprudence. That becomes the law of the land. Now, nothing prevents Congress. We are equal branches of government. The Supreme Court is not supreme over Congress. Meaning to say, our job is to legislate. Their job is to interpret.
Yes.
And that's why I am saying that we have the opportunity to define capital consistent with our own understanding and reading for the purpose of all these sections laid down in the Constitution. Now, let me proceed, Mr. President, with the permission of the
Just to
sponsor.
comment on that point. Well, yes, Mr. President, we have failed to define the meaning of the word capital. But precisely in this particular instance, it is the interpretation of the word capital in the Constitution by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And the Supreme Court's interpretation is superior to any legislation interpreting the Constitution, because
Yes.
under the Constitution,
I understand, Mr. President.
it is the Supreme Court
Yeah.
to interpret.
But remember, Mr. President, even the gentleman said that the Supreme Court can change its mind later on. Nothing prevents Congress from trying to define capital through legislation. And let it be. I'm saying that we have an opportunity here to define capital based on the mandate of the Constitution that says certain industries should be left to Filipinos. Now, I will tell you, and I will explain further on, halimbawa, why that majority decision may not be to our interests as defined by the Constitution.
As interpreted by us.
Yes, Mr. President.
Sorry?
Now, I will explain as we go along at the appropriate time why that decision, there is a dissenting opinion of Carpio.
Yes.
And maybe I should go straight to the point. But before I do that, let's take a look at what the Constitution says. Section 2, 10, and 11, Article 12 of the Constitution. Section 2. All lands of the public domain, waters, minerals, coal, petroleum, and other mineral oils, all sources of potential energy, fisheries, forests, or timber, wildlife, flora, and fauna, and other natural resources are owned by the state. With the exception of agricultural lands, all other natural resources shall not be alienated. The exploration, development, and utilization of natural resources shall be under the full control and supervision of the state. The state may directly undertake such activities, or it may enter into co-production, joint venture, or production sharing agreements with Filipino citizens or corporations or associations, at least 60% of whose capital is owned by such citizens. Owned by such citizens. Such agreements may be, and that continues, Mr. President, owned. So we're looking at ownership. Okay? Section 10. The Congress shall, upon recommendation of the Economic and Planning Agency, when the national interest dictates, reserves to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations or associations at least 60% of whose capital is owned by such citizens, or such higher percentage, hindi lower, higher percentage as Congress may prescribe certain areas of investment. The Congress shall enact measures that will encourage the formation and operation of enterprises whose capital is wholly owned by Filipinos. Okay? It goes on, in the grant of rights, privileges, and concessions Filipinos. The state shall regulate and exercise authority over foreign investments within its national jurisdiction and in accordance with its national goals and priorities. I suppose when the Constitution here says the state shall regulate and exercise authority, this could be referring to Congress and the SEC, because precisely why it is in the Corporation Code, who determines whether a corporation is Filipino or not, is based on the ownership structure. And I will get to that, Mr. President. That is one of the powers of the SEC. Now, Section 11, no franchise, certificate, or any other form of authorization for the operation of a public utility shall be granted except to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations or associations organized under the laws of the Philippines, at least 60% of whose capital is owned by such citizens. It goes on and on. Mr. President, the last sentence in this paragraph is also important. The state shall encourage equity participation in public utilities by the general public, referring to general public Filipino citizens. It's also in Section 4, Article 14, on educational institutions. The same thing applies in Section 11, Article 16, management of mass media, so on and so forth. Advertising, so on and so forth. Now, Mr. President. And that's why I am saying that it is important for us, it is an opportunity for Congress to define capital. Now, we can go to the heart of that Supreme Court decision.